Beige? Rachel blinked at the citation. My grandfather built that fence with his own hands. She stood in her front yard, slippers still damp from dew, holding the paper like it might melt. The sun had barely made it above the hedges, casting long shadows down Maple Avenue. Across the street, Saul was adjusting the American flag he hoisted every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, rain or shine. This morning, he gave a grunt that might have been a greeting, or just his usual arthritis. Rachel folded the notice slowly, slipped it into the pocket of her robe, and stepped back inside. The hallway was quiet, warm from the sunlight pushing through the lace curtains. She paused by the photo wall, her eyes settling on an old snapshot, her, no more than 10, standing beside Uncle Eugene in front of a pie table at the 2004 Willow Bend Pie Festival. He was holding a ribbon for best crust, grinning like a man who had nothing left to prove. The kettle whistled. She poured herself a mug, black with a splash of milk, and leaned against the sink. The smell of fresh paint still lingered from a project she'd meant to finish weeks ago. Now, apparently, the fence would take priority. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life. Sprinklers clicked on with sleepy rhythm. The morning show on WB 107.3 buzzed softly from Mrs. Kemper's kitchen window. Children's laughter trickled down from the bus stop. Rachel watched it all from behind the screen door, sipping and thinking. By mid-morning, she found herself at Willow Diner, as much for comfort as caffeine. The bell over the door jingled low, and the air smelled of bacon, toast, and a hint of lemon floor polish. Your usual, hon? Asked Loretta, pouring coffee before Rachel even sat. She smiled in return, sliding into her favorite booth near the window. Not 5 minutes passed before Janet walked in with the swagger of a woman who had already survived 2 full HOA administrations and outlived 3 rulebooks. She dropped into the seat across from Rachel with a thunk and placed a dented cookie tin on the table. What's this? Rachel asked, eyeing the stickers that once spelled snickerdoodles, but had mostly peeled off. Evidence, Janet said, popping the lid. Inside lay a history of enforcement, folded papers, stamped warnings, even a few faded photos of fences and bushes. The earliest was from 1997, non-standard paving stone color. Another accused a resident of unauthorized garden gnome placement. Rachel picked through them slowly, each one telling a story of control disguised as concern. She wrote one of those for your rose bush in 2012, Janet said. I remember because I baked banana bread that day and you nearly burned it reading that nonsense. Rachel chuckled. And yet here we are again. Janet leaned forward. Difference is, this time, maybe you'll do something more than repaint. They ate quietly. Loretta refilled their cups and left quarters on the saucer when she saw Rachel digging for change. Tipping in coins was still a thing here, something about respect, something about roots. Later that afternoon, Rachel stood in Dave's Hardware, staring at the color wall. Beige. So many beiges. Cottage cream. Sand drift. Wheat wisp. She grabbed 2 gallons of compliance tan without bothering to sample it. Back home, she set up a paint tray, pulled on gloves, and began the first coat. The brush moved slowly, like it remembered her grandfather's pace. He'd built the fence in the spring of '98, with cedar posts that had held strong through wind and rain and years of small-town smallness. As the second coat dried, Rachel paused. The fence looked plain. Not ugly, not beautiful. Just quiet. She reached for a smaller brush, dipped it into a bucket of diluted white, and began to stencil faint floral vines along the edges. They curled upward like whispers, subtle enough to miss unless you knew where to look. She added one quote along the bottom rail, just beneath the post nearest the mailbox. Liberty begins at the gate. It was a phrase her grandfather used when someone commented on how open their yard was. He liked air, he said. Liked honesty too. By sunset, the fence was done. The next morning, Rachel was in the kitchen rinsing her coffee mug when she saw the flash of lavender outside the window. Karen Hatch, in a cardigan set that somehow matched her clipboard, was walking up the driveway. She didn't knock. She never knocked. Karen circled the yard, pausing at each post like a cat inspecting new territory. Her heels clicked once, twice. Rachel opened the screen door before she could ring the bell. "Morning, Karen." Karen lifted the clipboard and pulled out a fresh form with practiced flair. "This may qualify as unauthorized ornamentation." "This isn't art," Karen hissed. "It's defiance in decorative disguise." She said it with her whole chest, standing on Rachel's walkway as if delivering a closing argument in a courtroom. The sunlight hit her sunglasses just so, turning her into a stern silhouette against the morning glare. Rachel, holding a coffee mug emblazoned with "World's Okayest Gardener," just blinked and took a slow sip. "It's paint," Rachel replied, tilting her head. "On a fence." Karen didn't flinch. "There are codes for a reason." Rachel considered responding with sarcasm, then thought better of it. The cicadas had started early, humming softly from the trees that lined the street, and Saul's country radio was drifting out of his open garage where he was beneath the hood of his old pickup, swearing affectionately. Karen snapped a fresh notice onto Rachel's mailbox and turned without a word. Rachel waited until she disappeared around the hedge before pulling the paper loose. This one was new. "Rose bushes, non-uniform height. Breach of Aesthetic Guideline 4B. She looked at the bushes. They were blooming unevenly. Because nature, she supposed. She walked down to Janet's later that afternoon, bringing banana bread still warm in a dish towel. Janet was on the porch, tea in hand, visor shading her eyes. "She's sighted the roses now," Rachel said, setting the bread on the wicker table. Janet didn't look surprised. She gestured to the seat beside her. "You're not the first she's tried to beige into silence." Rachel exhaled, dropped into the chair, and kicked off her sandals. "Has she always been like this?" "Not always," Janet said. "There was a time she baked pies for the veterans raffle. But power's like pie too, hon. When you start hoarding slices, you forget who helped bake it." They sat in companionable quiet for a while, watching shadows lengthen across the sidewalk. Then came the sound of a screen door and a low thud. Zeke, Janet's son, carrying 2 grocery bags with the ease of a man who worked with his hands. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, setting the bags by the kitchen door. "Zeke," Janet said, "this is Rachel. She's the one Karen's declared war on." Rachel gave a small wave. Zeke looked at her, recognition sparking. "You're Eugene Connor's niece?" Rachel nodded. "Guilty." Zeke laughed softly. "That explains a lot." He disappeared inside for a moment, then returned with a bottle of iced tea and leaned against the porch rail. "You working off the HOA's good graces or just surviving it?" "Mostly the latter," Rachel said. Janet filled him in on the latest citation. Zeke raised an eyebrow. "Non-uniform rose bushes? That's a new low." "I'm starting a notebook," Rachel said. "Guidelines, citations, her handwriting patterns, just for fun." Zeke nodded slowly. "Good. Track it. She's got favorite targets, you know. My friend Liam got cited for a plastic flamingo the same week her cousin installed a 12-foot metal heron and no one blinked." Rachel squinted. "Her cousin?" "Yeah. You didn't know?" "Didn't know she had family in town." Zeke shifted his weight. "He runs one of the landscaping companies on the HOA's preferred vendor list. And I've seen his name twice on the same invoice." Rachel's eyebrows lifted. "You work at town hall, right?" "Facilities and records," he said. "And sometimes I alphabetize things I'm not supposed to read." Rachel smiled. "We should talk." The sun had dropped behind the houses now, casting gold across the driveways. Rachel walked home with a fresh edge to her thoughts. She passed Karen's house on the way, immaculate lawn, planters with color-coded flowers, a mailbox painted dusty rose. Something caught her eye. Her own mailbox had a brass flag. Karen's didn't. Hers also had scrollwork at the base and a painted address in script. According to the guideline pamphlet, none of that was standard. And yet, she'd never once been cited for it. The next morning, she sat on her porch with a legal pad and a cup of chamomile, flipping through printouts from the HOA handbook. The language was vague, encouraged aesthetic harmony, discouraged personal ornamentation, it left room for selective enforcement. Zeke dropped by just before noon, setting a jar of pickles on the porch railing. "Payment for banana bread," he said. "My mother insists." Rachel nodded toward the chair beside her. "You ever seen the guideline for mailbox font size?" He chuckled. "Just another piece of beige bureaucracy." She showed him the list she'd made: names, citations, inconsistencies. Zeke whistled low. This might actually go somewhere. He took a step back, hands in his pockets, studying the fence behind her. "I think I know where the paper trail leads." "You're Eugene Connor's niece?" Zeke blinked. "And she's still giving you grief?" Rachel offered a crooked smile, slipping her keys into her coat pocket as the municipal building door clicked shut behind them. "Didn't know that came with immunity." They stood under the shallow overhang of Willow Bend City Records Annex, where the paint peeled from the doorframe and the elevator groaned like it had opinions. Inside, the office had smelled of yellowing files and electric coffee, half nostalgia, half fire code violation. Zeke held a manila folder under his arm. "You might want to see this." Back in his office cubby, he spread out 2 invoices on his desk. Both bore the WHA letterhead, Willow Homeowners Association, and the same date. Each listed funds allocated for beautification, South Garden median. One for $1,400. Another for $1,750. The payee? Willow Green Landscaping. Rachel leaned in. Same job. Same date. Different amounts? And Willow Green? Zeke said. Owned by Brent Hatch. Rachel blinked. Karen's nephew. Zeke nodded, tapping the signature line. She authorized both. Rachel took a step back. "Can I get copies of these?" "I already printed extras," he said, passing her the duplicates. That afternoon, Rachel drove home with the windows down, letting the warm September air wash over her. The cicadas were louder today, a kind of chorus that didn't mind who listened. She parked in her gravel driveway and sat in the car for a moment, thumbing her phone. Her thumb hovered over Eugene's contact. She hadn't called him in months. Not since his last speech at the annual Memorial Day breakfast, when he'd told the crowd, "Good communities don't fear questions, they welcome them." Rachel had helped write that line. Or at least sparked it, years ago. She pressed the button. He picked up on the second ring. "Rachel?" "Hi, Uncle Gene." She didn't jump in right away. She asked how his knees were, how the new town library renovation was going. He asked about her roses. Then, finally, "Do you remember Karen Hatch?" There was a pause. "Vividly." "She's citing me," Rachel said. "For a fence, rose bushes, and now my solar lanterns." There was another pause, longer this time. "You think it's personal?" "I think it's systemic," Rachel said. "And I think I'm tired." Eugene didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "Be careful. Dig carefully. I'll see what I can find from my end. I didn't call to ask for favors." "I know," he said gently. "But I taught you better than to look away when things start to rot." After she hung up, Rachel sat for a long moment in her living room, surrounded by the faint scent of paint and dried lavender. A memory surfaced, sudden and clear. She was 11, walking beside Eugene in the heat of a late summer afternoon, handing out campaign flyers. He'd crouched beside her when she tripped over a broken curb and said, "You don't win votes by shouting. You win them by listening." She'd nodded, scraped knee and all. She turned to the bookshelf, pulled out the old leather notebook her grandfather used to keep by the porch. It still held faded notes about fence measurements and plant spacing. On the first blank page, she started a new list. Citations, neighborhood patterns. Rachel, fence, aesthetic, roses, non-uniform, lanterns, light pollution. Saul, grass mower before 7 a.m., sound. Janet, wind chimes, mailbox, ornamentation. Karen, no recorded citations, ever. She stopped there and stared at the page. Later, another envelope arrived, tucked neatly beneath her welcome mat. Inside was a third citation: solar lanterns exceed ambient light limits after dusk. Rachel laughed, not loud, but bitter. She walked out to the mailbox and taped the citation to the side with a clothespin, facing out. That evening, Zeke dropped by with a container of homemade chili. "From Janet," he said. "She's worried you're forgetting to eat." Rachel waved him inside, pointed him toward the living room where maps and notes now littered the coffee table. Zeke whistled low. "You building a case or writing a manifesto?" "I'm drawing lines," she said, handing him a sticky note with vendor names. "And they're all starting to connect." They ate in silence, chili warm and spicy, the porch light flickering as dusk settled over Willow Bend. Saul's porch radio played Old Willie Nelson, and the air smelled like dry leaves and vinegar cleaner. Later, alone again, Rachel flipped through the photos she'd taken of Karen's front yard. Matching mailbox. Decorative ironwork. Solar pathway lights brighter than hers. The hypocrisy wasn't new. But now, it was documented. Her phone pinged. A message from Eugene. "Dig carefully. This isn't just beige, it's institutional." Rachel looked out the window at her fence, the stenciled flowers faded just slightly in the early autumn light. She turned to her notebook, picked up her pen, and whispered to herself. "All right," she says, "let's see what beige can uncover." "This ledger's messier than Thanksgiving dinner at the firehouse," Zeke muttered, flipping through entries. The binder spread across his kitchen table was thick, its plastic sleeves warped with age and printer heat. The overhead light flickered occasionally, as if even it was uncomfortable with what they were uncovering. Rachel leaned over the pages, eyes tracing columns where dollar signs mingled with phrases like beautification effort, ornamental zone, and seasonal harmony addendum, south segment. "If a line item has 3 adjectives," she said, "it's hiding something." Zeke looked up. "Your grandfather." Every time he balanced his checkbook. Even called his grocery receipts fiction if you squint. Zeke flipped another page. "Check this, Willow Green LLC paid 4 times in 1 month. All for lawn treatments. Same addresses. And Karen's cousin owns the company." Rachel let out a low whistle. "That's more than favoritism." "It's a pattern," Zeke said, standing to pull a second stack from a milk crate near the fridge. Invoices without itemization, contracts signed at odd intervals, all rubber-stamped with the same board approval initials. Rachel took photos of several pages, laying each sheet flat to avoid glare. Her fingers were steady, her jaw tight. "Eugene needs to see these." She sent a set of attachments with a brief message: confirmed repeat payments. Potential conflict of interest. Thoughts? His reply came minutes later. Hold off on confrontation. This needs airtight review. She sighed and closed her phone. Zeke slid a fresh cup of coffee across the table. "You ever think she planned this whole web just to make herself feel important?" "I think she planned it to make sure no one else could ask questions." By late morning, they took a break and walked to Willow Diner. The bell over the door gave its usual sleepy jingle. Loretta was humming along to WB 107.3, and Patsy Cline floated from the speakers like memory itself. Janet waved from her usual booth near the back. The walls buzzed with low talk. Rachel couldn't tell if it was the coffee or the ledger, but something in the room felt sharper, more alert. They slid into a booth by the window, and Zeke laid his baseball cap on the seat beside him. "You seen the new fee notice?" someone at the next table asked. Rachel glanced over. 2 older men were sipping coffee, their silver hair slicked back like this was still the town's first Tuesday after church. 1% hike, the second muttered. "Again. And they still haven't fixed the east sidewalk." "I heard the flower fund got 1,000, said the first. "But I haven't seen a single tulip." Rachel and Zeke exchanged a look. Outside, the sun stretched across the pavement, casting long stripes between the parked trucks. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a paper she hadn't had time to check earlier. It was an HOA notice, but not for her. It had been tacked to the diner's bulletin board. The top read, "Community Notice, Unlawful Distribution of Internal Documents. Legal Remedies in Review." Zeke read it over her shoulder. Subtle. It's meant to scare. He peeled it off the corkboard and folded it neatly. It's also confirmation we've got her attention. Back at Zeke's, they resumed digging. The binder was almost too full now. He'd started tagging pages with sticky notes, colors denoting redundancy, misuse, or vague justification. One sheet in particular caught Rachel's eye. "Community Welcome Monument," she read aloud. "Where?" Zeke asked. "It says it cost $5,000. Contractor paid in full. Listed under Civic Engagement Initiatives." He scanned the page, then glanced up. "There's no monument. Closest thing we've got is the faded 'Welcome to Willow Bend' sign at the train depot. And that's been cracked since 2017. Rachel photographed it twice. "I think this is it," she said. "The thread to pull." She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. Outside, dusk had settled in. The apartment window was fogged at the edges from the evening chill creeping in early. A car passed slowly on the street below, its tires soft against the blacktop. Zeke's laptop dinged. He opened his inbox, clicked once, and let out a short exhale. "From the city clerk," he said. Subject line just says, "Found something you'll want to see. Stop by after 5. It was never built, the clerk said, tapping the document. But the checks cleared, twice. The records vault in City Hall felt colder than outside, like years of bureaucracy had cooled the air to permanent autumn. Rachel stood next to Zeke at the long counter, squinting at the document illuminated under a desk lamp. The paper was official, stamped twice, and signed off with a flourish that looked suspiciously familiar. 2 payments, the clerk confirmed, flipping to the summary sheet. One from the HOA account, one directly from the city's beautification grant. Same item code. Community Welcome Monument. Zeke folded his arms. "Except that monument doesn't exist." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Not in this town, it doesn't." They left with scanned copies and a fresh resolve. On the walk to the car, Rachel replayed Saul's voice from just a few days back. She stopped public meetings the year the benches were replaced. "Bad glue, I tell ya." No meetings meant no questions. No questions meant Karen could sign anything she wanted without a soul knowing. That evening, Zeke brought the binder over to Rachel's porch. They sat under the glow of her solar lanterns, still unapproved, and worked through the documents. She laid out a long roll of butcher paper on the porch floor. With a Sharpie and colored markers, she drew timelines. Green for expenses, red for inconsistencies, yellow for citations. Strings of paper taped end to end spilled into the yard. "What's this one again?" Zeke pointed to a circle marked Vendor, Willow Green LLC. 3 payments in 1 week. 2 signed by Karen. 1 by Bill Madsen, the HOA treasurer. "Bill Madsen," Zeke said, flipping through a folder. "That's the guy who once tried to invoice the HOA for redoing his own patio." Janet arrived a few minutes later with lemonade and lemon bars balanced on a tray. "I come bearing gossip," she said. "And sugar." She set the tray down and looked over the paper trail with something like satisfaction. "We're doing a tea," she said. Rachel blinked. "A tea?" "A neighborhood tea. On the lawn behind the community park. Technically not a meeting. Just tea. And pie. Maybe a little light reading." By the end of the week, they'd organized the documents into flyers and charts, discreetly tucked into folders marked Recipes, Pie Swap. On Saturday morning, Janet's tea bloomed like wildflowers. Folding chairs dotted the lawn. Paper plates sagged under the weight of lemon pound cake and deviled eggs. The air was filled with the hum of old voices exchanging older stories. Rachel moved from group to group, asking gentle questions. Ever been cited for something unusual? Do you remember when the HOA fees jumped? People answered. They remembered. They brought their own papers. Saul, ever the cynic, held up a wrinkled HOA letter and grumbled, "She fined me for planting marigolds. Said they were aggressive." Laughter rippled. Heads nodded. The community was listening. The next day, Rachel found a new flyer taped to her mailbox. It bore the HOA letterhead and a block of formal prose. To the residents of Willow Bend, certain individuals have been spreading unverified information with malicious intent, undermining the cohesion of our community. Legal recourse is under consideration. Karen's name was signed in fine script. Rachel didn't flinch. She pinned the flyer to her corkboard and returned to her project. At dusk, she painted a simple sign with block letters. Town Hall Meeting. Let's talk about our homes. This Saturday, Pavilion Lawn. She taped it to the community park kiosk under the yellowed flyers for missing cats and guitar lessons. The next night, Eugene showed up on her porch. He wasn't wearing a tie, just slacks, a flannel shirt, and the look of someone who had been reading too long and sleeping too little. "I spoke with the city attorney," he said without preamble. "We're opening a public audit." Rachel blinked. "That's fast." "It's overdue," he said. "I've also requested copies of the HOA's financials from the last 5 years. If Karen refuses to cooperate, we'll issue a formal request through the district office." He looked around the porch. "Nice lights." Rachel smiled faintly. "Illegal, according to the HOA." He chuckled. "So was my campaign poster in '03. Later that night, Rachel was brushing crumbs from the porch rail when a car rolled up slowly. Karen stepped out alone, her heels clicking in the quiet. She didn't approach the porch. Instead, she walked to the mailbox, slid something gold and heavy into the slot, then turned and left without a word. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed with gold foil. The label read, "Cease and desist, formal notification of defamation and unauthorized disclosure." "The truth," Eugene said, voice clear in the crowded hall, "is not slander. It's accountability." The town hall community room hadn't seen this much foot traffic since the bicentennial quilt unveiling in 1994. Folding chairs scraped against waxy linoleum, the old American flag above the podium fluttered slightly in the draft from the swampy AC unit. The coffee urn in the corner hissed periodically, producing cups of weak brew and small clouds of steam. Rachel sat in the second row, a folder balanced on her knees. Zeke leaned against the back wall, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Janet was knitting, not because she needed to, but because it kept her hands busy. She'd brought lemon bars in a reusable cake tray and had already pressed one into Saul's hand. He ate it without speaking, his eyes fixed on the podium. Eugene stepped forward, tie straight, voice steady. "We're here to listen," he said. "We're here to see." He nodded to Rachel. She stood, walked to the front, and opened her folder. The air in the room was hushed but not hostile. A few chairs creaked as people leaned forward. She spoke clearly, steadily, no dramatics. She began with the rosebush citation, moved to the duplicate vendor invoices, then the non-existent welcome monument. She didn't accuse. She laid out facts like stones across a stream, stepping through each one so that others could follow. "Some of you have lived here for decades," she said, glancing at Saul, then at Linda near the back. "You've paid your dues. You've trusted the process. And somewhere along the way, the process stopped being about us." She turned to Eugene. He gave a slight nod. Zeke stepped up next. In one hand, he held a single page. "This memo was filed 2 years ago," he said, holding it up for the room. "It confirms that the last HOA election was cancelled due to lack of interest. No reschedule. No notice. Karen Hatch has served beyond the term without proper re-election." Murmurs stirred. Linda's lips parted in surprise. Bill, still in his seat on the end, rubbed the bridge of his nose. Karen stood near the back, arms folded, lips pressed into a line. As Rachel returned to her seat, Karen moved to the front. "This is slander," she said. "You're twisting numbers and gossip. I have served this community tirelessly." Her voice sharpened. "You think planting a few daisies and drawing timelines makes you qualified to lead? You're nothing without rules. Chaos isn't community." Nobody replied. A child in the second row whispered, "She's the mean fence lady," and their parent hushed them gently, but not harshly. Karen's eyes swept the room, searching for allegiance. Janet met her gaze and didn't blink. "Saul, too." Bill looked away. Linda stood, slowly. "Karen," she said, "you've done a lot for us. But this isn't right anymore." Bill rose beside her. "I call for a vote of no confidence." Karen's face flushed. "You can't do that, this isn't official." Eugene raised one hand. "Actually," he said, "it is. This space is public, and the bylaws you once upheld allow for such a motion when a quorum is present." Karen stepped back, stumbling slightly on the edge of the rug. "This is betrayal," she hissed. "After all I've done." No one responded. She turned on her heel and strode toward the door. At the last moment, she paused by the table where Rachel's copies and visuals had been laid out. "The ledger," Eugene said quietly. Karen's hand hovered over it. She looked at him, then at Rachel. Her hand shook. She left it behind. The door didn't slam. It just clicked shut. Silence held for a moment, then a collective breath seemed to ripple through the chairs like wind through dry leaves. From somewhere in the back, a voice spoke softly. "What if we didn't need an HOA at all?" The envelope was plain, unmarked, and taped to Rachel's door. Inside was one sentence. "You win. I quit." She read it twice before setting it gently on the kitchen table, beside a mug of lukewarm tea and a folded napkin that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. Outside, the October breeze nudged fallen leaves along the sidewalk like small, rustling secrets. Rachel stepped onto her porch. The morning air was cooler now, layered with wood smoke and distant pumpkin spice. Flannel throws draped across porch swings, and ceramic jack-o'-lanterns smiled faintly in the early light. Across the street, Saul was tying a plaid scarf around his retriever and grumbling good-naturedly about dog fashion shows. Janet ambled up the walk, holding a paper sack in one hand and a slim book in the other. "She really did it?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "No fanfare. Just surrender." Janet smiled thinly. "She'll hold on till the bitter end, unless you beat her with silence." Inside the sack were cranberry muffins, still warm. Rachel took one, broke it in half, and offered the other to Janet, who waved it off before sitting on the porch swing with a sigh. By mid-afternoon, Eugene had met with 2 city officials at the community center. No press, no podiums. Just quiet confirmations, signatures, and a single statement. "The Willow Bend Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved." Bill and Linda were there. They didn't speak much, only nodded when the decision was made official. Bill removed his HOA lapel pin and placed it on the counter. Linda folded the last meeting agenda into quarters and tucked it into her purse, not as a keepsake, but maybe as a reminder. Rachel spent the next morning writing names on index cards, then tearing them in half and tossing them into the compost. No list. No invitations. Just a soft idea left out on the wind: potluck, her front lawn, come as you are. They came. Saul brought potato salad in a chipped blue bowl. Linda made her famous deviled eggs with paprika swirled like red cursive. Zeke arrived last, with Janet and a tray of apple cobbler that somehow disappeared before anyone admitted to touching it. Rachel strung a strand of paper lanterns between the porch columns. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and played Old Willie Nelson and Patsy Cline. Children chalked hopscotch squares across the driveway. Janet appeared beside her, holding up a thin book with yellowing pages and swatches of color like faded memory. "Vintage paint samples," she said. "From 1964. Let's repaint history." That night, the old HOA clubhouse became a canvas. They covered the walls with chalk, paint, and stories. One panel held a mural of a garden bursting through latticework. Another bore handprints of every child who'd been fined for sidewalk chalk. Rachel added her own touch, a small white vine in the bottom corner, curling like the one on her fence. The next day, Eugene arrived with a wooden sign, freshly carved. They mounted it at the neighborhood entrance, where the old HOA notice board had stood like a scolding ant for years. This one read, in warm serif font: "Welcome to Willow Bend, a community, not a committee." No ribbon cutting, no speech. Just Eugene adjusting the frame, Rachel handing him a screwdriver, and Saul offering unsolicited advice from the curb. As the crowd began to drift home, Zeke tapped Rachel lightly on the shoulder. He handed her a slim file, no thicker than a church bulletin. "These are names," he said. "All fined unfairly. Want to fix it?" Rachel dipped her brush into a new color called Prairie Wildflower. "No beige. Not even close." The paint rolled smooth along the fence rail, curling around the wood grain like a breeze through tall grass. She added a swirl, a petal, a tiny burst of gold. The same floral stencil that had once nearly gotten her sighted now sprawled proudly across not just her fence, but 3 others down the street. Janet's fence featured sunflowers. Saul's, marigolds, defiant and bright. Even Linda's had a soft cluster of bluebells painted near the gate. Wind chimes tinkled in the breeze. Children's voices rose in rounds of sidewalk hopscotch, the chalk as bright as ever. No one came with a clipboard. No one told them to stop. At the edge of the green, the old HOA building now bore a new sign made from reclaimed wood and framed in ivy, the Little Free Porch Library. Inside, the folding chairs were gone, replaced by shelves of gently used books and planters of thyme, lavender, and mint in mismatched teacups. A poster read, "Take one, leave one, water the rest." Rachel walked past the porch garden with a stack of envelopes tucked under one arm. Each one contained a handwritten apology, a modest refund check, and a note that simply read, "We hope this feels like a beginning." She and Zeke had stayed up late drafting them, sitting under the warm porch light with mugs of cider and the last slice of cobbler between them. He'd written slowly, deliberately, and sealed each envelope like it mattered, which it did. By noon, the neighborhood smelled like lemon oil, mulch, and potato salad. Someone had dragged out a folding table and set up pitchers of lemonade. Janet brought deviled eggs and hummed along to Patsy Cline playing from a Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a potted fern. Saul manned a grill, flipping hot dogs with the same frown he wore for serious yard work. Rachel set down her paintbrush and joined the group under the shade of the old sycamore near the park. Eugene sat nearby, cardigan sleeves pushed up, his thermos resting on his knee. He hadn't made a speech. He didn't need to. "It was always yours anyway," he'd said when they hung the last refund letter in the clubhouse window. A little girl in overalls approached Rachel shyly, pointing at the mural that now covered one whole wall of the former HOA office. It was a riot of color: sunflowers, daisies, prairie grass, climbing vines. Tiny hands had helped paint parts of it. Big ones had added finishing flourishes. Near the bottom, a quiet vine curled in white, echoing the first stencil that had started everything. "Can I add a flower?" the girl asked, brush in hand. Rachel knelt and nodded. "Of course." The girl dipped her brush, leaned in, and began. As the sun slanted lower, turning the leaves gold and amber, Rachel found herself sitting on a quilt beneath the mural. Eugene lowered himself beside her, groaning slightly as he settled. They sat for a while, listening to the wind chimes and the soft chatter of neighbors passing pie and lemonade. Children darted between picnic tables. A dog barked. Someone's radio crackled with the first notes of "Take Me Home, Country Roads." Rachel glanced at the mural, then at her uncle. "Maybe we needed the beige," she said with a small smile, "to appreciate the color." As the fences bloomed in color and laughter returned to the sidewalks, Willow Bend felt like a place rewritten by its own people. Rules hadn't vanished, they'd simply found their rightful scale, no longer towering over neighbors but resting quietly beside them. In standing up to quiet injustice, Rachel and her community rediscovered what had been theirs all along: voice, trust, and the slow power of showing up. When used for good, rules are just garden trellises, guiding, not choking, what wants to grow. And maybe, just maybe, beige was never the problem, it was forgetting who chose the paint.